Fifth Avenue glittered under the autumn sun as Madison Carter pushed open the towering glass doors of La Belle Couture. For a moment, this felt like the start of everything. The weight of months saving every dollar and dreaming every night settled quietly in her chest. The boutique's crystal chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars, their light dancing across silk gowns that draped the showroom like art pieces. The air inside smelled faintly of jasmine and polished wood, a world away from the subway platform she had stood on minutes earlier. At 15, Madison already carried herself with a quiet kind of grace. Her dark brown skin glowed softly beneath the sunlight spilling through the boutique's windows, and her natural curls, gathered into a neat high puff, bounced gently with every step. Wearing a simple white t-shirt, faded jeans, and her scuffed white sneakers, she stood out sharply among the elegance around her. Yet she didn't shrink. She had earned her place here. She had worked long hours, babysitting played violin for hours at Central Park, and tucked every tip and crumpled bill into a small jar marked, "For the dress." She approached the sleek white counter, clutching her worn backpack against her side. Behind the counter stood Heather Collins, a tall, sharply dressed white woman with perfectly pinned blonde hair. Her eyes flicked toward Madison as though scanning an unfamiliar object at an exclusive gallery. Beside her stood Samantha Brooks, younger, softer in her movements, her eyes darting nervously between Madison and Heather. Heather's professionally bright smile barely concealed a flicker of judgment. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone edged with cool detachment. "Yes, thank you," Madison replied, her voice calm, though her heart beat just a bit faster. "I'm here to pick up my order. It's the emerald gown from the fall collection. My name is Madison Carter." Heather's manicured fingers hovered over the tablet on the counter. She didn't immediately meet Madison's eyes, instead speaking while scrolling slowly. "The emerald gown," she repeated, dragging the words. "That's one of our more exclusive pieces." She glanced briefly at Madison's simple outfit, her meaning hovering unspoken in the air. Beside her, Sam leaned over to peer at the screen, whispering just loud enough, "That dress is nearly $5,000. Madison's shoulders stiffened slightly, but she held her ground. She had heard variations of this tone before at school, on the subway, even in certain stores. The implication was always the same: you don't belong here. But she was not a child today. She had come prepared. Without flinching, Madison reached into her backpack, pulling out a well-worn, folded receipt. She carefully smoothed it before sliding it across the counter. "Here's my confirmation," she said with quiet confidence. "I placed the order 2 months ago and paid the deposit in full." Heather took the paper between 2 fingers, as though it might stain her polished nails, scanning it with exaggerated care. She murmured. "Well, I do see the deposit." She paused, glancing at Madison, as if weighing her next words carefully. "Of course you understand, Miss Carter, that certain items are often placed on hold for our VIP clients. There may have been a mix-up." Madison's pulse quickened, but she steadied herself, planting both feet firmly on the marble floor. "There's no mix-up," she said softly, though the steel in her voice was unmistakable. "I ordered the gown. I paid for it. It's mine." A small stir rippled through the boutique. 2 women browsing an adjacent rack paused, glancing sideways. A man seated nearby lowered his glossy catalog, his eyes flickering toward the unfolding scene. Still no one spoke. Only the quiet hum of the boutique's background jazz filled the tense space. Heather sighed, the sound theatrical, as though granting Madison a great favor. "I'll check in the back," she said crisply. "If the gown is here, we'll locate it." She tapped the tablet one last time before turning on her heel, disappearing behind a set of mirrored doors. Madison exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack. The cool air brushed against her skin as the boutique seemed to hold its collective breath. The soft clink of heels against marble echoed from distant corners. She glanced around the room again. The pair of women whispered behind raised hands while the man resumed flipping through his catalog, pretending disinterest. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, visualizing her upcoming performance at Juilliard. The stage lights, the polished wood of her violin under her chin, the first notes of Vivaldi's Spring floating into the concert hall. She had dreamed of this recital for years. This gown was not simply fabric. It was her statement, her shield, her earned place under that spotlight. Then the boutique's chime rang again, soft, delicate, but carrying a shift in the air. New footsteps entered, measured and deliberate. Madison opened her eyes, her instincts bristling. Trouble had arrived. The boutique's soft buzz shifted as Victoria Prescott and her daughter Chloe glided in. Their presence demanded attention without a word. The door closed behind them with a quiet click that seemed to mark a new tension in the air. Even the low notes of background jazz seemed to soften, as if yielding space to them. Victoria Prescott was every inch the embodiment of Fifth Avenue's upper echelon. Her platinum blonde hair swept into an immaculate chignon pearl earrings, catching the boutique's chandelier light with practiced elegance. She wore a deep navy silk coat over her tailored dress, exuding the kind of effortless wealth that spoke not just of money, but generations of it. At her side, Chloe Prescott, 17, and already a mirror of her mother, followed with a delicate sway. The teen's honey-blonde hair was twisted into an expensive-looking updo, her pink chiffon dress floating around her, like a designer's whisper of youth and privilege. Madison Carter, standing by the counter, watched their entrance without moving. She felt the familiar prickle that always came when certain kinds of people entered a space like this, the kind who looked at her brown skin and saw an intruder. Madison, a young black girl, stood in her simple jeans and white t-shirt, vastly out of place amid the curated luxury. Yet her back remained straight, her eyes calm. She had earned her place here. Heather Collins immediately perked up at the sight of Victoria. Her polished tone turned syrupy sweet. "Mrs. Prescott, what a lovely surprise," she said, voice rising a note. "And Miss Chloe, you look radiant." Victoria offered a tight smile, barely glancing at Heather as she strode forward. "We're here for the emerald gown from your fall collection," she announced, her voice cool but authoritative. "My daughter has a charity gala next weekend, and this dress will be perfect." Heather hesitated for a beat, eyes flickering between Victoria and Madison, who still stood by the counter. Madison felt her stomach tighten. She stepped forward before Heather could speak. "Excuse me," Madison said, voice steady but clear. "That's the gown I ordered. I placed my order 2 months ago and paid the deposit." Victoria finally turned toward her as though noticing Madison for the first time. Her pale blue eyes slowly swept down Madison's frame, from the dark tone of her skin to her modest clothing, to the worn backpack slung over her shoulder. There was a momentary pause, then a faint condescending smile spread across Victoria's face. "Ordered it," she repeated, her tone dipped in mock politeness. "Sweetheart, that gown is quite aspirational. It's designed for someone who can truly carry it." She gestured vaguely, as if dismissing Madison to some distant corner where she might better belong. Chloe, emboldened by her mother's presence, stepped forward. The young girl's smirk was almost playful, but her words carried a sting. "Yeah. No offense, but you don't exactly scream La Belle Couture. Maybe you'd find something cute at a thrift store." Madison's cheeks flushed, but she did not flinch. She was used to moments like this, too many school hallways, too many stairs on the subway, too many people assuming her place in the world without ever knowing her story. But this time was different. This time she would not yield. "I ordered that dress," Madison repeated, her voice measured each word sharp as glass. "I paid for it. It's mine." The boutique seemed to pause around them. The two women browsing nearby had frozen their hands, hovering over the silk gowns like delicate birds. The man with the catalog lowered it again, eyes narrowed in interest. Even Sam Brooks, still standing beside Heather, shifted uneasily, her gaze darting from Madison to Victoria. Victoria arched a brow, undeterred. "Perhaps there's been an error in the system," she said smoothly, turning her attention back to Heather. "I am, after all, a VIP client. You know my account, Heather. I expect the gown to be pulled for my daughter immediately." Heather's mouth opened, then closed, her confidence beginning to waver under the weight of the confrontation. She glanced briefly at Madison's receipt still resting on the counter, but said nothing. "Well," Heather began, forcing a smile as she addressed Victoria, "there's a record of a deposit, but naturally, as one of our VIP clients, we want to prioritize your needs." Chloe grinned, already assuming victory. "Perfect. It'll look amazing on me." Heather reached toward a velvet box resting on a nearby display pedestal. She opened the lid, slowly revealing the emerald gown lying inside like a captured jewel. The rich green fabric shimmered under the boutique lights, its intricate lace glinting with every movement. Madison's breath caught as she saw the dress, her dress vulnerable and exposed, as though it might be snatched away at any moment. But as Chloe extended a hand toward the gown, Madison stepped forward, her hand landing firmly on the lid. She closed the box with a decisive motion. "No," she said, voice low but steady. "You're not taking it." The boutique fell utterly silent. The background jazz seemed to fade into the marble floor as every set of eyes turned toward the standoff. Even Victoria's expression hardened, the polite veneer beginning to crack. Victoria let out a brittle laugh, as if amused by Madison's defiance. "Dear," she said coolly, "you're making quite a scene over something that clearly wasn't meant for you. This isn't your place." Madison met her gaze unblinking. "I'm not leaving without my dress," she replied, each word deliberate like a vow etched in stone. Victoria's smile vanished for the first time since she entered. Chloe shifted uncomfortably, but her mother placed a calming hand on her arm, eyes narrowing once more on Madison. The boutique's air thickened, every breath charged, as though the marble and chandeliers themselves awaited what would happen next. Silence thickened the boutique's air as Victoria Prescott's smile thinned into something sharper. "If you insist it's yours, prove it." Her words hung like a dare, slicing through the tension-filled room. The soft hum of conversation that once danced beneath the boutique's chandeliers now ceased entirely. Madison Carter, the young black girl standing her ground, reached for the slightly crumpled receipt resting on the counter. Her dark fingers gripped the paper like a lifeline, smoothing its creases with deliberate care. She lifted her chin, meeting Victoria's icy gaze without hesitation. "Right here," she said firmly. "My name, my deposit, my order. It's all there. Check it." Heather Collins hesitated, her hand hovering as though the receipt might scorch her fingertips. The boutique's polished professionalism began to crumble beneath the weight of the confrontation. Samantha Brooks shifted beside her, visibly uncomfortable, as her eyes darted between the women. Heather finally took the receipt, scanning it once more on the tablet, her lips tightening. "It does show a deposit," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Mrs. Prescott is a VIP client. These situations can be delicate." Her words faltered as she glanced nervously toward Victoria, silently seeking guidance. Victoria, sensing Heather's wavering confidence, stepped closer. her voice lowering into a conspiratorial murmur just loud enough for the audience to catch. "You know," she said smoothly, "I noticed her lingering by the racks earlier. She seemed unsettled. I wouldn't be surprised if she's trying to stir trouble." Madison's pulse quickened. She saw where this was going even before Victoria spoke her next words. "Perhaps you should check her bag," Victoria suggested with feigned innocence, her smile returning like a cold wind. "Just to be certain nothing was misplaced." The boutique seemed to exhale all at once as murmurs erupted. One of the women browsing whispered to her companion, who quickly raised her phone, beginning to record the unfolding scene. The older man near the catalog adjusted his glasses, watching with an unreadable expression. Samantha gasped softly. "Heather," she began, but Heather held up a hand, silencing her. Madison felt her stomach tighten, but she stood taller, refusing to let the weight of every eye pinning her down shake her resolve. Her dark brown skin, the very reason for these constant assumptions, seemed to radiate quiet strength in this moment. "You're accusing me of stealing?" Madison asked, her voice low but steady, based on what Victoria's face feigned surprise. "Oh, of course not, dear. But in matters like this, transparency is always helpful." She gestured vaguely toward Madison's backpack. "I'm sure you understand." Chloe Prescott smirked, emboldened by her mother's maneuver. "Yeah, better safe than sorry," she chimed in with mock concern. "You know things can go missing." The room buzzed with soft voices, some sympathetic, others murmuring judgment. The boutique, once a sanctuary of luxury, had transformed into a stage where everyone watched the unfolding drama. Heather looked again at Samantha, who swallowed hard, clearly caught in a moral tug-of-war, but no one intervened. Madison inhaled deeply, grounding herself. Then, with deliberate grace, she unzipped her backpack and slid it across the counter. "Check it," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. "Go ahead." Heather reached into the bag, her hands moving stiffly. She pulled out a well-worn wallet, a half-empty water bottle, and a few folded sheet music pages. Nothing more. Nothing suspicious. Nothing missing. Heather cleared her throat. "There's nothing," she murmured, her face flushing lightly. Victoria's smile faltered for just a second, but quickly returned. "Well, that doesn't prove anything." She snapped, her composure beginning to slip. "She's still causing a scene. Give the dress to Chloe." Heather hesitated, glancing at Samantha, whose expression had hardened with quiet shame. But Chloe, sensing victory, reached eagerly toward the velvet box containing the emerald gown. Her manicured fingers grazed the delicate lace with greedy anticipation. Before she could lift the lid fully, Madison's hand shot out, slamming it shut once more. The sound echoed in the boutique, snapping the audience's attention back to her. "No," Madison said, voice steady, but her chest heaving slightly beneath the growing pressure. "You're not taking it." The boutique had become a tinderbox. Every glance, every breath, every shuffle of feet fed the growing fire. Phones now openly recorded, their tiny red lights blinking like witnesses. With a trembling hand, Madison reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered briefly before she pressed the call button. "Mom," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I need you at LaBelle now." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket, never breaking eye contact with Victoria. "You'll see," Madison promised softly, her words hanging like a quiet storm. Victoria chuckled, folding her arms across her chest. Calling for backup. "That's cute," she sneered, but her eyes flickered, a hint of something uncertain crossing her face. The boutique held its breath once more, waiting for what or who would come next. The boutique's front doors swung open again. This time it wasn't another customer, but Madison's calm storm arriving. The soft chime echoed like a signal, shifting the already tense energy into something sharper. Dr. Evelyn Carter entered with quiet authority, each step measured yet fluid against the marble floor. Her deep brown skin gleamed under the boutique's cool lights, radiating grace and composure. She wore an ivory-wrapped dress that hugged her tall frame effortlessly, simple, yet undeniably elegant. The kind of presence that required no announcement, people simply noticed. All eyes turned toward her. Conversations froze. Even Heather Collins stiffened behind the counter, the receipt still clutched in her hand. Samantha Brooks inhaled sharply, recognizing that something significant was about to unfold. Evelyn's gaze swept across the room before landing on her daughter. "Are you all right, Madison?" she asked softly. Her voice calm, but beneath its warmth lay a firmness that could not be mistaken. Madison nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I'm okay, Mom," she answered quietly, finding comfort in her mother's steady presence. "But they're trying to take my dress." Victoria Prescott, who had watched the arrival with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled disdain, finally stepped forward. Her pearl bracelet glinted as she adjusted it, trying to reassert her composure. "Your dress," she echoed, her voice dripping with skepticism. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. My daughter Chloe needs that gown for an important event. Surely you can appreciate how time-sensitive these things are." Evelyn turned her gaze toward Victoria, her expression unblinking but controlled. The air seemed to tighten further, as though the boutique itself was watching. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice smooth as silk, yet edged with steel. "My daughter ordered that gown 2 months ago. She paid for it with her own money. There is no misunderstanding." The women browsing nearby whispered behind manicured hands, sensing the shift. Phones discreetly continued to capture every word. Victoria's smile thinned further. "I didn't mean it like that," she offered, feigning gentility. "It's simply, this boutique serves a certain clientele, and sometimes errors happen. My daughter," she gestured to Chloe, who hovered slightly behind her mother, "has a charity gala next weekend. This dress is simply better suited for someone in her position." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't raise her voice. "Better suited," she repeated, "because my daughter's skin is darker, because her clothing today is simpler, or because you assumed her place here was an error the moment you saw her." A quiet gasp escaped one of the women near the gowns. Samantha's hands clenched slightly at her sides, her face pale. Heather shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. Victoria's lips parted, but no words emerged immediately. She blinked momentarily, thrown off balance. I never said that," she stammered, her polished facade beginning to fracture. "That's not what I meant." Evelyn stepped forward, closing the distance. Though her tone remained, even the weight of her words pressed down on every ear in the boutique. "Intent does not erase impact," she said. "You saw my daughter's skin, her simple clothes, and assumed she did not belong in this space. You thought wealth was the only currency that mattered here. But what you failed to recognize is the currency of integrity, and that Mrs. Prescott, my daughter, possesses in abundance." Chloe shrank further behind her mother, her earlier smugness gone, replaced by visible discomfort. Evelyn now turned toward Heather, her gaze sharp yet composed. "And you," she addressed calmly. "You were entrusted to serve every customer with dignity, but instead you allowed this humiliation to unfold. You held the receipt in your hand and still allowed these baseless accusations." Heather's voice faltered as she tried to defend herself. I didn't know she was your daughter, Dr. Carter." Evelyn's expression hardened. "Her identity as my daughter should never have mattered. Her receipt was enough. Your responsibility was to honor the transaction, not to judge her worth." A few customers nodded subtly. The balance in the room had shifted entirely. The authority Victoria had wielded moments ago now hung limp, stripped by Evelyn's poised confrontation. Victoria's breath quickened, searching for some last foothold. "Surely this can be resolved privately," she offered with a weak smile. Evelyn's voice remained soft, but absolute. "It will be resolved right here," she said. "The dress is Madison's. She earned it with hard work and dignity. And she will leave this boutique with what she paid for, and with her head held high." The boutique stood frozen like a stage awaiting its final scene. Even Chloe remained silent, eyes now downcast. Samantha Brooks looked on her internal conflict, evident on her face, something shifting inside her. Victoria opened her mouth to argue further, but then hesitated. She glanced at the silent crowd at the recording phones, and then at Evelyn's unwavering expression. Her face flushed with mounting frustration, but she said nothing. Evelyn gently placed a reassuring hand on Madison's shoulder. The warmth of her mother's touch settled Madison's racing heart. She could feel the trembling in her legs ease as a deep breath filled her chest. The battle for now had tipped, but the final words had yet to be spoken. "You judged my daughter before you even looked at the facts." Evelyn's voice rang not loud, but impossible to ignore. The boutique had grown so quiet that even the soft hum of the ventilation seemed louder than any whisper. Every word she spoke cut through the heavy air like a needle through silk. Victoria Prescott's cheeks flushed a deep pink. She struggled to summon her usual poised demeanor, but found her voice thinner than before. "I think you're blowing this out of proportion, Dr. Carter," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. "This was simply a misunderstanding, nothing more." Evelyn Carter, standing tall in her ivory dress, didn't flinch. Her brown skin gleamed under the boutique's warm lights. Her eyes calm but sharp, reflecting not only the moment, but decades of history that hung behind every insult her daughter had faced today. "A misunderstanding is when you send an email to the wrong person," Evelyn said softly. This, she gestured lightly around the room at Madison, at the receipt still lying on the counter at Heather Collins, standing awkwardly behind it. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a judgment. Madison Carter, the young black girl who had endured the humiliations piling up for nearly an hour, stood beside her mother, silent but steady. With every word her mother spoke, Madison felt the heavy knot inside her slowly loosen. The weight of countless similar moments she had endured as a young woman of color, in a world eager to define her worth, was finally being named aloud. Victoria's eyes flicked toward Heather for rescue, but none came. Heather stared down at the tablet screen in her hands, her fingers frozen. She looked trapped, the polished surface of her professional veneer long since cracked. Samantha Brooks, the younger sales associate, shifted beside her. Sam had remained quiet through much of the ordeal, her face tight with discomfort. But now her gaze lifted. She caught sight of a woman customer discreetly recording the scene on her phone, her camera pointed directly at Victoria. The weight of truth suddenly sat heavily on Sam's conscience. "I saw the receipt when she handed it in," Sam spoke up, her voice tentative but audible. "Everything checked out. Madison ordered and paid for the gown." Heather whipped her head toward her junior colleague, eyes wide. "Sam," she hissed under her breath, "this isn't your place." But Sam, feeling the gazes of the watching customers and the certainty settling in her gut, stood a little straighter. "It is now," she said firmly, her voice gaining strength. She did nothing wrong. A quiet ripple of murmurs stirred among the customers. Several nodded, some glancing between Victoria and Evelyn, as though the lines between the powerful and powerless had begun to shift right before their eyes. Victoria's face hardened, and her voice sharpened as her patience unraveled. "You people," she snapped, her tone slipping, "are always playing victim." The boutique seemed to inhale collectively at her words. The racial sting of the phrase landed like a slap against every ear in the room. One of the women holding her phone gasped aloud. Another lowered her phone slowly, her mouth slightly open in shock. Evelyn Carter didn't flinch. She stood silent for a beat, letting Victoria's words hang in the air, exposed for what they were. Madison's chest tightened, but her mother's presence anchored her. Samantha's face went pale. Even Heather blinked, unable to mask her discomfort now. "You've said enough, Mrs. Prescott," Evelyn finally replied, her voice calm as ever. "And now you've revealed far more than you intended." Chloe Prescott, who had been hiding behind her mother, looked around nervously, shrinking further, as her mother's carefully crafted composure crumbled before the silent but watchful audience. The man in the suit, who had earlier watched quietly, now spoke softly from his corner, breaking his long silence. "She has the receipt. She has the right to the gown." His voice, older and deliberate, was not loud, but it carried authority. Another customer added gently, "Let the girl have what she earned." The balance in the room shifted completely now. What had begun as a private confrontation had become a public reckoning. The room no longer belonged to Victoria and her privilege, but to the truth that Evelyn and Madison carried with quiet dignity. Victoria's face blanched under the collective gaze. "This is absurd," she muttered, her voice shaking. "We don't need this drama." She turned to Chloe, grabbing her daughter's arm. "We're leaving." The customers watched them retreat toward the boutique's glass doors, their heels clicking against the marble like a rushed surrender. But Evelyn's voice stopped her one final time. "Remember this moment, Mrs. Prescott," she said, her voice neither bitter nor angry, but resolute. "You tried to steal not just a dress, but my daughter's dignity. And you failed." Victoria froze for half a second before pushing the door open and exiting with Chloe behind her. The boutique's silence was finally broken by a low murmur of whispers, subdued applause, and exchanged glances among the customers. Samantha looked at Madison and Evelyn, her eyes slightly wet but filled with relief. "I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner," she whispered. Evelyn offered a small nod. "But you spoke when it mattered." Heather, still standing behind the counter, looked away, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her complicity. The storm had passed, but the air still hummed with the electricity of what had just unfolded, a quiet, profound shift where dignity stood taller than privilege. 1 week later, Lincoln Center glittered under New York's night sky. Madison's stage awaited. The marble plaza outside reflected the glow of street lamps and passing car lights, while well-dressed guests filed into the recital hall, murmuring with quiet excitement. Inside, the auditorium hummed with the low rustle of programs, the faint tap of polished shoes against velvet carpet, and the subtle clearing of throats as the audience settled into their seats. Madison Carter stood backstage, her hands gently cradling her violin. The polished wood was warm beneath her fingers, familiar and steady. She glanced down at her emerald gown. The gown she had fought for, its deep green lace shimmered softly under the backstage lights, like a forest bathed in morning dew. At 15, Madison, a young black girl from New York, stood not just as a performer, but as a symbol of quiet resilience. Her deep brown skin glowed against the vibrant fabric, her natural curls styled into a soft, elegant bun that framed her face. Tonight was not just a performance. It was a culmination. Through a small crack in the curtain, she spotted her mother seated in the front row. Dr. Evelyn Carter, poised and radiant in her ivory dress, sat with her chin-lifted eyes sparkling with pride. The events at La Belle Couture lingered faintly in both their minds, but tonight was about far more than that confrontation. It was about claiming space not through anger, but through grace and undeniable talent. Around Evelyn, a few audience members whispered, as they glanced at Madison's name printed in the program Madison Carter, Violin Solo Vivaldi's Spring. Some recognized the name from the video that had quietly circulated online after the boutique incident. But there was no paparazzi, no scandal, only a gentle current of admiration beneath the respectful murmur. Backstage, the stage manager gave a small nod. It was her turn. Madison inhaled deeply, allowing the breath to anchor her. She stepped forward, the weight of her gown grounding her stride. The hush in the auditorium deepened as she emerged into the golden spotlight. Hundreds of eyes followed her every step, but she felt only the calming presence of her violin beneath her chin. Without hesitation, she raised her bow. The first notes of Vivaldi's Spring poured out like fresh sunlight after rain, bright, crisp, and full of life. The melody danced across the concert hall, filling every corner with its joyful rhythm. Madison's fingers moved effortlessly along the fingerboard, her body swaying gently in time, as if the music and she were one being. The notes climbed and fell like birds in flight, each phrase bursting with vitality. She played not just with technical mastery, but with something deeper, a quiet defiance woven into every measure, a refusal to be diminished. The audience sat in silent reverence, captivated. A professor in the third row closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. A young girl clutched her mother's hand, wide-eyed, perhaps seeing her own future reflected on that stage. Evelyn's gaze never left her daughter, her chest rising with each breath of the melody, her eyes glistening. As Madison approached the final bars, she allowed herself to feel the culmination of everything. The long hours of practice, the battles fought in silence, the weight of assumptions she had carried on her young shoulders, and the victory of simply standing here, visible, heard, and respected. The final note hung delicately in the air before fading into silence. For a breathless moment, the room held perfectly still. Then the auditorium erupted. Applause thundered around her, the standing ovation rising like a wave. Madison lowered her violin and bowed deeply, the emerald gown shimmering as she moved beneath the lights. She looked up and locked eyes with her mother. Evelyn smiled, nodding softly, a silent well done that carried more weight than any applause. Backstage, as Madison returned to the wings, her fellow students gathered around, their voices a jumble of praise. "That was incredible," one whispered. "You owned it," another beamed. Madison clutched her violin close, her heart swelling, the echoes of La Belle, now distant, powerless. She had answered them not with anger, but with grace and music. In the days following, the video of the boutique incident quietly resurfaced alongside clips of her performance. While some praised her talent, others reflected on the lessons hidden behind the confrontation. The world often judged too quickly, but tonight was proof that dignity once defended shines brighter than any luxury boutique could offer. And as Madison and Evelyn stepped into the cool Manhattan night, mother and daughter arm in arm, the city lights glimmered around them, a fitting reminder that sometimes the most beautiful victories are the quietest ones. As the last note faded into the vaulted ceiling of the concert hall, Madison's bow lowered gently, her emerald gown catching the warm glow of the lights. In that moment, there was no trace of the boutique's cold marble floor, no echoes of whispered judgments, no eyes scanning her skin before her name. There was only the music, pure, honest, and undeniable. What unfolded inside La Belle Couture had never truly been about a dress. It was about worth, about who is seen and who is questioned, about the quiet courage it takes for a young black girl like Madison Carter to step into spaces that weren't always built with her in mind, and to claim what was rightfully hers, not through anger, but through dignity, resilience, and undeniable talent. Her mother, Dr. Evelyn Carter, stood by her, not simply defending, but guiding her toward a strength Madison already carried within. The lesson here is not new, but it remains urgent. Never judge a person by the surface of their appearance, not their clothing, their skin, or the weight of their wallet. Because beneath every simple exterior may reside a story of determination, of quiet sacrifices, and of dreams carried with unwavering grace. As the old saying goes, the tallest trees often grow in the quietest forests. When we pause long enough to see people truly see them, we find that worth is never measured by luxury, but by character. Like a well-tuned violin, true beauty lies not in the instrument's price, but in the soul of the one who plays it. So perhaps in moments when the world invites us to judge too quickly, we might instead choose to listen as an audience does when the first note of a melody begins with openness, patience, and a readiness to be moved. If this story has touched something in your heart tonight, consider carrying that warmth forward, a gentle word, an open hand, or simply the willingness to see the light in someone who's long been standing in the shadows.